Welcome to Time to Press Pause, a podcast for CEOs by CEOs. I'm your host, Ellen Williams, CEO of The Salient Strategist, and today I'm speaking with Paul Dupuis. Paul is the founder and CEO of Take 5 Global KK. He is also the former CEO and chairman of Randstad Japan and former head of Randstad India, and was recognized as one of India's best leaders in times of crisis in 2021. Take 5 Global is a consultancy firm focused on business advisory, leadership development, and M&A in Japan and India. Paul is also the author of the E5 Movement. The Japanese version is titled The 5 Golden Rules of Leadership. Welcome, Paul. I'm so happy to have you on today's episode. I'm excited to meet you for the first time. Your reputation definitely precedes you.
Well, thank you, Ellen. Greetings from Tokyo. Although behind me, that's the Himalayas. That's I would probably say that's my definition of heaven, and it's a place where I push pause. Well, this is at the northern tip of India, quite close to the border of China. It's a place called Ladakh in the Himalayas of northern India, which is a place in the winter where the kids skate out on the frozen lakes all day long and play hockey. Now, as a Canadian, well, you know, it's almost like a religion for us playing hockey. To be able to do that in India was a great escape in a way from the role I had as CEO leading a large, complex organization. How far away from the corner office is this?
Fantastic. I think we'll probably dig deeper in that in a little while, but it's time to press pause. So please share your story of when you needed to press pause.
Sure. Well, thank you again for the opportunity to share this, my thoughts on this. It's such an important topic, especially now. And I think what we went through in recent years, even more so, emphasized the importance of pushing pause. Most of the high-achieving leaders, CEOs that I've been around, tend to be pace setters. That just kind of comes with, let's say, the DNA of the high-achieving CEOs. That's not to say it's a good thing. And I learned a very important lesson, a couple lessons. I was in Japan, in and out of Japan for about 25 years. And I was working for a large global company called Randstad, the world's largest staffing recruiting company. And I was in Japan, and I got a call from Amsterdam, the head office, to say, Paul, we need you in India. Now, at that time, our operations in India were struggling. They were deep in the red, and we had a lot of issues, from compliance to people, attrition, and so on. And the opportunity was to go to India and transform, lead a turnaround. Now, that sounds great on paper, but we know the reality is never having been to India, not knowing anything about the local culture, of course, right into nitty-gritty labor laws and everything that is important to understand in order to steer a ship. It was 75,000 people, 70 offices across the country. And in India, that means many, many mini countries, cultures, languages, and so on. So I arrived in India and I went full speed. And I realized at one point that I needed to push pause because I was starting to burn out. And I also realized the importance of not only pushing pause, but I would add another piece to that. Push pause, take a deep breath, and ask for advice. I think a lot of the leaders you speak to and the leaders that I know hesitate to ask for advice. There's something about the old definition. I call it the old definition because we need to really look at reinventing what leadership means. The old definition was the leader is someone who knows. And the reality is nowadays information is at everyone's fingertips. If you want to know something, you simply go to Google or a Wikipedia or a ChatGPT, and you can get the answer to pretty well every question. So gone are the days where the leader was sitting in a corner office and team members would come to get an answer. The answers are all out there. So the role of the leader has changed significantly, especially in the past few years. So that was kind of one realization: push pause, but also ask for advice. When you don't know, ask for advice. And that's what's not found on ChatGPT. Advice is kind of wisdom built up over years and years of experience, successes, some slip-ups as well. All of that comes together into wisdom. Hard to package that into an AI tool. And I actually believe that wisdom is something that will be really difficult to be captured by AI. I think that's the one really important human quality of a leader that is extremely valuable. So push pause, ask for advice. I started to do that because I was running all over the country trying to figure out this big, complex organization that I was given the mission to turn around. And the more I asked for advice, the more I started to see through the fog. And the more I was kind of reassured and reaffirmed that I was on the right track. So that was one time. But there was another time which really impacted me deeply. I was the CEO of this huge ship with colleagues across the country. And then COVID hit when we were in India. And I'm sure you would have seen the news. COVID hit India really hard. Yeah. There was the Delta variant arrived in the winter of 2020. And at that time, it just brought India to its knees. And at one point through the year, we thought we had beaten it, and then it came back even stronger. And what ended up happening, my role shifted from generating results, delivering the profit, the revenue growth, and so on. And it really shifted towards keeping people safe. Unfortunately, we had a lot of colleagues pass away from COVID. And so each day I was faced with sitting in front of a computer in total lockdown and talking to families of our colleagues who had passed away. And India is in a very emotional culture, which I really enjoyed while I was there. I mean, people are really open and friendly and warm. But at the same time, during tragedy, it's also a very emotional time. And as CEO, my role was to talk to the families and to console and to assure them that we would do our best to support through this difficult time. Well, I was doing this day after day for almost 3 months, and it started to take its toll on me personally, as a person, but also as the leader. I felt helpless. And that was a really important moment that I realized I needed to push pause. And the push pause at that moment was not only about being kind to my mind, was a phrase that we came up with, be kind to your mind. It wasn't only about that, it was actually rethinking the purpose of the CEO role. What's the purpose of the leader? And it got me thinking about, if you take the image of you're a captain of a big ship sailing through choppy water, and your team is on the ship behind you, and you're in the choppiest of the choppy waters now, whether it's COVID or any other crisis that comes, right? This is the moment for the leader to show conviction and to reassure everyone that we're going to get through this. But to be honest, I think Jim Collins in Good to Great talks about the Stockdale paradox, confront the brutal facts, right? So let everyone know that, yeah, you know what? We're in a tough situation right now. The waters are choppy, but we're going to get through this, and we're going to get through it together. In other words, my discovery was that the most important role of the leader is to make the team feel safe. That's both psychological safety as well as physical safety. Being in India, in many ways, completely changed the way I see leadership and the role of the leader. Of course, it's about generating results at the end of the day. But when you get all those other things right, creating an environment where everyone can safely be themselves, the true best version of themselves, where every person can shine, in other words, the enabling leader, then of course the results will follow. So that was, for me, in tragic circumstances came one, let's say, important positive discovery.
Wow. So 2 times you press pause, or at least 2 stories you've shared with us. Really interesting, certainly the different cultures that you talked about. I've never been to India, but I think what I learned in the last 10 minutes was the importance of the CEO really being in touch with their emotions in order to lead people, right? Not employees, so to speak, right? Not resources.
Right.
And I think to your point, that is a little, maybe a more modern take, because to your first story, CEOs are expected to have all the answers.
Yeah. And I would say, especially being that I'm on this side of the world, and most of my career has actually been in Asia. And there is something quite unique about Asia in general, regardless of the country, quite hierarchical. And the leader is almost leader as guru. Leader is someone who knows, someone you go to for the answer. And clearly, in the new world of leadership, if we talk about leading into tomorrow, into the day after tomorrow, that style of leadership has quickly become archaic. It's not effective. The leader who spends his or her time focusing on enabling, and I'll use that word again, the enabling leader. So show up every day and commit ourselves as leader to enable every single member of the team to be the best true version of themselves. In other words, everyone has natural brilliance. We all have our weaknesses as well. Instead of focusing on the weaknesses, let's help every single person leverage their strengths. And that goes for the CEO as well. And we were talking a little bit earlier, Ellen, about CEO. What does the E stand for? You can have a lot of fun with this, sitting around with fellow leaders. Define that E. What does it mean to you? And it's not about right or wrong, because leadership is an ism. You create it based on your experiences. It becomes yours. You own it. It's like open source code, but it really is your own personal thing. And one E is Excel spreadsheet. So the leader who measures everything. And those leaders tend to be very metric focused, tend to be less people focused and more focused on the numbers. That's not a bad thing, but there are moments, as I mentioned earlier, in the midst of COVID, when the ship is shaking and colleagues are experiencing this tragedy, there's a moment where you need to walk away from the spreadsheet and be with people. On the other hand, when I first arrived in India, the business was struggling, we're deep in the red and so on. I was spending a lot of time in Excel spreadsheets because I had to.
Yeah.
Right. And it's sort of like a meter, isn't it? Knowing when to be a pace setter, when to be at the front, when to be at the back, supporting, when to be by the side, encouraging, and even when not to be there. That's also part of being an enabling leader. So the same thing goes with the E as in Excel. I would say perhaps at the other extreme would be, instead of Excel, define it as engage, the chief engagement officer. Leaders also, when they have a compelling vision, which touches hearts and minds, are exciting the colleagues around them, the chief excitement officer. I would even say, I'll come back to the final one. For me, in this stage in my journey as a CEO and my career, I'm absolutely in the enabling stage right now, chief enabling officer. In fact, that's the title that I'm carrying now, chief enabling officer.
I love that. I think, so you asked CEO and we could have fun with it. I would envision the E being evolution or evolve. Right. So the CEO, they're growing the business. They should be growing the people, evolving their knowledge, right? Asking for advice, to your point earlier. I've used the word evolve a lot throughout my life. I would say my career, but really my life. I've never put it in CEO terms, so I'm kind of digging that right now. But you have to evolve, and I had to evolve from a really bad marriage and reinvent myself and like sort of bring myself back to life and refine my confidence. So I have used the word evolve a lot throughout my life, and certainly my career has evolved and it's taken its turns and its detours. So I like that. The question of what can we define the E in CEO? That was a fun little exercise. I appreciate that. I do have a question for you.
Sure,
So
go
if we
ahead.
marry your two time to press pause stories together, one where you need to be looking for advice and the other where you really have to find your empathy. During the time you're in your second press pause, did you at that point also reach out for advice?
Yeah, I did. In fact, it became instinctive because I discovered how powerful it was when I first arrived in India in tough times, but let's say the world was not flipped upside down at that moment. I learned some important lessons that when you ask for advice, first of all, it's a sign of strength, not a sign of weakness. We get stronger when we are ready and willing to accept advice from people, and we get some answers as well. Sometimes we don't like what we hear, but that's okay. That kind of gives us a different perspective. Sometimes the advice we hear reaffirms what we thought was the right way to go. So it's encouraging. When I got to round 2 during COVID, it was absolutely instinctive to ask for advice. But here was the challenge, Ellen. there weren't many people out there in the world who had gone through this kind of crisis. Let's face it, we've all been through crises. There's different crises we've experienced, but this one was especially unique. And so what ended up happening was what I saw evolve were leaders who normally would not ask for advice were all reaching out to ask for advice. So we had group calls with leaders across industries. We had webinars, suddenly webinars, and of course Zoom was born, and we were talking to each other, and we were actually getting advice from each other. So this was a really important moment, I think, for a lot of leaders to kind of check the other ego at the door and say, all right, I'm going to start talking to colleagues or to peers to navigate through this tough time together. And I think that was a really important moment. And what I see now is the after effect of that. A lot of leaders that I sort of interact with are asking more and more for advice. And here's the other thing about advice. One wonderful thing, and this goes across all languages, and I've worked all over the world. There's one thing that is universal. Of course, smiles are universal. We know that. There's one other thing. If you sit in front of someone in any culture, anywhere in the world, regardless of your role, and you say, hey, I'd like to ask your advice on something, the person who's on the other side feels good. They feel important. So there's something else that comes out of this. When you ask for advice, you're actually showing, well, first, I need advice. I don't have the answers. And secondly, you're making the other person feel important. And so that's where I've seen the magic happen. I've seen people feel good that they've been asked by me for advice. And I tell you what, I feel pretty good too when someone asks me. So yeah, I'm a big fan of asking for advice. I do it so much more now. I should have done it more when I was in my 20s and 30s. And here I am in my 50s asking for advice all the time, right?
One of the things you said about advice, and I think it's a great topic, especially for leaders, is that advice isn't always a new piece of information. It can be reaffirming. Hey, I'd like your advice on this. And then the answer you get is exactly what you were thinking. And of course, there's reaffirming advice. But I must admit that when I hear the word advice, I do think that it's going to be some new piece of information. It's going to be something I hadn't thought of. And I will admit also that over the years, I'm a little older than you, society has shown that or has dictated asking advice is a sign of weakness. And that's something I'm still trying to move past and be willing to take advice. For years as a consultant, you did have to have the answer. Oh, I'm a consultant, I should have the answer. So when I don't, I feel like I should. And I'm thrilled to hear that even at a CEO level, not everyone has the answers.
I would say, thank you for sharing that. You're spot on. We're not from that much of different of a generation. I think we both like 1980s and maybe 70s music as well, right? So the reality is we were raised in an era where leaders had the answers, teachers had the answers, and so on. But now it's actually about asking questions, right? It's provoking thought, prompting thought. But one important comment about leadership that I discovered as well, and we talk about asking for advice, a leader needs to have conviction. At the end of the day, decisions need to be made. And sometimes those decisions are courageous decisions. And sometimes, in spite of all the advice from folks that you've consulted, that advice might be to go left. But at the end of the day, that leader may decide to go right. And that takes courage. But going through the process of asking for advice, considering opinions and facts before making a decision is an important part of being an effective leader. There are many times where I went in exactly opposite the direction from the advice that I was getting, but I took the advice and I reflected on it. I carefully considered it and then made my decision. That's also something important to consider. I don't think we should be zigzagging as well based on the advice we're getting. I mean, we consider it, we combine it with facts, and then we make the courageous decision.
I definitely agree with that. Not all advice is going to resonate because, again, the advice comes from experience and wisdom, which you touched upon earlier. And my experience and your role where you are now are all different. And if I give you advice from a very different perspective, as you pointed out, it's something to consider. But if it just doesn't resonate, then it's not advice you need to take. It's just advice you need to listen to. And I think
Yeah,
that's an important key to asking for advice. It doesn't mean you have to actually take that action.
exactly. Yeah, absolutely agree. So that's important, and I'll go back to what I said earlier. It's a sign of strength. I absolutely believe I became a better leader. Uh, I would even venture to say a better person overall during that time in India, through challenge. There's a Japanese proverb that I use often here, but it's, as the rain falls, the roots grow stronger. And it poured rain when I was in India leading that organization for the first few years. And then COVID hit on top of that. But to counterbalance that was the discovery that it's okay to push pause. In fact, it's important to push pause. It's just as important to ask for advice.
That's great advice. I love it. It is important to push pause. People need that breathing room, that opportunity to think. Absolutely. So I do want to get back around to your hockey in
Yeah.
India.
Speaking of pushing
And
pause,
please,
yeah.
please, please tell us a little more about that.
Sure. So I was based in Bangalore in South India, and as I said, leading the turnaround of the business. And I was just, I was running fast, and it was the most, let's say, exhilarating challenge, and probably the most difficult challenge I've had in my career. But I have to say, net, I was enjoying it. One day, I got a call from the Canadian Embassy in Delhi, saying that they were hosting an Indo-Canada friendly ice hockey tournament in this place called Ladakh. So I'm sitting in tropical Bangalore, South India, far, far away from this place. So I looked on the map and never heard of Ladakh. And when you look up Ladakh, what you discover is what you see behind me. That's Mount Everest in the background. It is the most beautiful place for me on earth. I just absolutely love it. The people are wonderful. It's a very different culture from most of the rest of India. It's Tibetan Buddhist. It's actually the summer home of the Dalai Lama. So it just added more richness to my India experience, going up there, joining the hockey tournament, playing hockey on this lake, which is at about 14,000 feet, almost Mount Everest base camp height, right? And then getting to know the local people, then lifting the layers and saying, what challenges are they facing? And how could I maybe enable and support? And that's when I discovered the battle with climate change, which is very real in the Himalayas. And to keep it really simple, this lake that you see behind me, this is actually a village lake. It's like a community center. So the villagers come together. They build this for the kids every summer or every winter. There are these villages all over this Ladakh region, very similar sets of lakes like this that are turned into rinks. But what's happening is the season's getting shorter and shorter every year. They used to be able to play from October until late March when the lakes were frozen over. Well, that's getting shorter at both ends. And that's even clear in the time I've been going the past, 5-6 years at least. So that's clear. And so we're doing some volunteering in schools. It's an open invitation to anyone who, plays hockey. That's great. If you don't play hockey, if you're interested in visiting a place that's being affected by climate change and volunteering and being part of the cause, we welcome everyone. People come from all over the world. It's become quite an event. And this is my push pause, regardless of where I am and what I'm up to at my own journey. Every January, I get on the plane and I go right here. I'll be on this lake in January 2025 with friends from around the world. And we're going to do our best to do well and do good up there.
Do well and do good. It's definitely a mantra I've had over the last 5 or 6 years. I've definitely gotten more involved with sustainability. Last year, I became a Sustainability Excellence Associate. So I'm an SEA. A lovely little caveat to my time to press pause is chatting with you about sustainability and learning about the fact that you're volunteering to do things about the climate. So that was a bonus to this conversation. I really appreciate that, Paul.
Well, thank you. We absolutely have a lot in common. Maybe we can get you up to the top of the world one day, Ellen. And
I will consider the challenge. I'm not sure I will take it, but I
it's an open
appreciate the
invitation,
invitation.
yeah. Because sometimes you need to push pause. You're building a world famous podcast. At one point, you're going to push pause, and either you go to the beach or you go to the top of the world. You
All
could do
right,
both.
then. I was going to say, maybe I'll do both. I appreciate that, Paul. Thank you so much. It's really been a pleasure speaking with you. The information you've shared, a couple stories, and a great volunteer situation that you're in there. And I appreciate that. Thank you so much for being with me here today.
Thank you, Ellen. Really enjoyed, and all the best to you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Time to Press Pause.
To learn more about Paul Dupuis, go to take5-global.com.
To learn more about me, go to thesalientstrategist.com. And be sure to join us again wherever you listen to your podcasts.